Well, welcome to the final chapter of this Super 2 Armature restoration. It's been a long road to get to this point. Now it's time to make the merger between the repaired commutator plate and the armature itself, where we've repaired the windings. Right now we're just doing a little comm check on these. If I can get the wires to touch up and try to get an idea of the ohm rating across them, just to make sure we've got continuity, and also see what the resistance is across the poles where the wires are still there, the originals, not the ones we've extended. For the extensions, I feel really confident about those because you can see them individually, but these ones that are bound up and curled up, you can't see those quite as well. So before we go through the trouble adding the plate on, if there's some breakage there somewhere, I want to try to identify it right away and get it fixed before we go through the trouble of getting that commutator plate back onto the armature itself, to the core, and getting it all set up and getting halfway through and with several tabs reattached, and then only to find out we've got a broken wire somewhere. So now we're gonna clean off these wires. Just give them a light sand here. And this is also putting the repaired wires where we added those extensions. Let's give them a little tensile strength test. If they're gonna break, now's the time, right? We don't want them to break later when we go to actually put them back on the armature themselves. So I'd rather experience that pain while it's still manageable. It might seem like I'm sanding them a lot, but I'm very, very light here. And use a fine grit sandpaper. You certainly don't want to use a coarse grit sandpaper and take a chance on breaking those wires. Now, as for the wires that come underneath the armature, remember we had some that were broken, so we backed off one wind on the arm, that single pole, which gives us enough to be able to reattach and solder onto the tab. And that single unwind is not going to hurt a thing in the world at all. Like you literally wouldn't see a variance on the meter for a single pole unwind. Now, if you started undoing several inches of wire, yes, you're going to see some variance there. But in this case, very, very little. Now, if the windings from the factory were done in such a way where you could unwind the inside and the outside, I don't think even then a single wind on both ends would hurt anything, or whether you'd see a significant variance enough to make a difference. But if you were to do, a couple inches on both ends, then obviously you're starting to get into a half a foot or get close to it. I think then you might see some pretty big variances there, but 1 inch of wire is not going to be a deal breaker at all. So pretty satisfied with how clean the wires are. Now it's time to install the plate. And it really looks like it starts to all come together when you mesh these two together, doesn't it? Then we'll work on getting these prongs bent back down. These Super 2s, the way they were made, slightly different from the other AFX armatures. They had more of a straight tab. The Super 2s are almost curled over. And they'll, because the center bore of the hole of the commutator plate is the exact same size as the shaft and the armature core, it works out well. You don't have to be as critical. You just slide that back over, know that it's center of the pole, and then recrimp those arms over until they're touching and holding nice and snug, and you're ready to go. Good shape. Now you want to make sure that the plate is parallel, if you will, with the 3 armature poles, because you want it to run flat on the surface. But by the time you add up the windings, and you've got equal windings that are, and in this case the original windings, the comm plate is going to set against those, and these armature plates on the Super 2s kind of had a natural bow anyway, because they were pressing them down to get those 3-prong claws back around them. So it's naturally going to kind of fall into that spot. If you remember when we were sanding the surface, when we went to sand perfectly flat, you could see that it was touching some of the more center pieces of the commutator plate rather than the outside, and it's because it's concave convex, if you will. It's not perfectly flat. So because they came together originally, or assembled originally in 1972 together, they fall right back together. Now we're going to start off with working on the repaired tab. If we're going to have a problem right out of the gate, let's go with that one. And then also we're going to go with this one, because if the wiring is going to break, it's going to break where it's the oldest and most brittle. So we're going to start with that, with the same principle. If it's going to break, let it break early so we can make some changes to the plan and go from there. And then 2, these wires are the exact right length. We were able to salvage some of them, which makes them a bit more tedious. They want to get away from us. They've got some solder already on them, so they're not super flexible. They're kind of stiff and rigid where that solder is still stuck to the wire itself, so you have to be extra delicate. So the whole goal here is to get everything wrapped around there. Even from the factory, they try to do it at least twice, which means you're going to have potentially 8 strands of wire, 2 from each side, and wrapping around twice from each side. So you want to get them to lay down as flat as possible, because you don't want them dragging your chassis once the armature goes in. So getting all of them positioned in there nice and snug, where they're not going to slip and jump away, or jump off of there, or slide off the end, is kind of tricky. And then also squeezing them down to where they're nice and flat, so when we go to put the solder on, it doesn't build up and create a solder knot that needs to be sanded. Every once in a while you'll come across a Super 2 armature where the machine that I guess they would run it through and just give it a quick sand, and you can see the actual sanding marks. So I don't know if that was a machine process or it was individually, or how they went about that, but not all of them have it. This one's trying to be a bit tricky as it comes back around that corner to come across the comm surface one more time. It doesn't want to pull up tight. It acts like something might be holding it there. And we're just trying to manipulate it into place and then smash it down flat. At least get it to the point where we're satisfied with it anyway. And once we get it where we want it, then we can put a little bit of glue on there, and then that'll hold the bottom, keep it from slipping and sliding around on us and sneaking back off of that tab. Now personally, I like the UV glue. It's got a little bit of more work time with it. I can get it where I want it. If I put too much on, I can dab it off. And then once I'm happy, you can turn on that little UV light and it'll set it and cure. And I don't have to worry about it moving around or sticking to anything else. once you UV cure it on the surface, it's definitely dry to the touch. For the most part, it's dry. You'll get a solid cure overnight, but for the purpose of what we're doing and these little projects, it works fantastically well. Now that we got that done, we'll move on to number 2. Same principle, rinse and repeat. Just get these little things just so, which actually I think we're still on number 1 here. Just finish it up. Now that it's stuck on the bottom, we don't have to worry about it unraveling and slipping off on us, so we can put the fine touches on it. Let me see, we're just trying to get that wire to lay down in there. This is where I about jacked it up. Could have broke a wire here slipping off like that. So we'll get it back pretty close. I'm best off to leave well enough alone. And really the main problem is there's not enough extra wire here to maneuver. We're having to deal with the exact right amount, which is very, very difficult to grab a hold to, get it in a position you want, and then get it to lay flat without it moving. If the wire was a little longer, I could get another half a wrap on it and it would hold up. And you certainly can't glue the surface of the complete because you got to solder that, and then the solder won't stick to the glue. So here, just kind of smashing it as flat as I can. Yeah, pretty happy with it. So let's move on to number 2 and see what we can get accomplished. Hopefully the next 2 won't be near as difficult as the first. They'll probably have their own little challenges. This one's actually got right much buildup on the plate itself, on the wire itself. So it'll make it somewhat challenging to get it wrapped around there and lay down. So it has its pros and its cons. When it's got this extra solder on that like that, it becomes more rigid and stiff. So if you can ever get it bent into position, it won't just unfold as easy. But the downside of that is that you could potentially break it. So it's kind of a catch-22, if you will. These wires, even from the factory, they were always towards the outer section. When it's coming off that leading pole, it's right on the edge and it's hanging out there. I've never been a big fan of that. I feel like it either will catch stuff or you'll hit it or something will happen which will cause you to break one of those wires. You know, and a tattletale way to see that is you can check it with an ohm meter. Generally, when I've ohmed these with this yellow meter, the one I have, I can't remember what brand it is. You'll probably see it here after a while when we go to check this one. But generally, I will see anything from 4.2 to 4.9, which is what they say they're supposed to be from AFX originally. And I recently went out and bought a brand new Klein meter, and I tested 10 different Super 2s, and they range from 3.6 to 3.8, which I know is not right. So I don't know whether you believe the cheap meter or you believe the high dollar meter. I know I rewrapped some Armatures too, but I feel like that yellow meter that I have is pretty accurate, and I just kind of gauge everything off of it. If my Super 2s are testing anywhere from 4.2 to 4.9 with it, which falls within the range of what the manufacturer said they were supposed to be, then I feel quite confident when I'm measuring other things that they're also accurate. But there's always variance in those kinds of things. We're making pretty good progress here. Again, get these things just to lay down as flat as we possibly can. Once we get it where we want it, we'll move on. The really cool part is that UV is going to kind of hold it where we need it, pretty close, while we work on the others. Now the great part about having put these extension on is we've got some meat to work with here. So having that little bit of extra is going to help out tremendously as we use that to kind of manipulate these wires into shape. But you'll notice there's a pretty big chunk of solder still sitting on the wire. And we want to be ever so careful, right? We don't want to use the soldering iron to try to get that off, because then we take a chance on the wire breaking apart again. So that's not going to work out for us. So we have to be very careful and try to bend it slightly before we actually try to wrap it around. And hopefully, if all works well, we'll bend it in just such a way where it'll lay down on that turn right where we need it to. But at least having this extra wire gives us something that we can kind of pull against to snug it up to make sure she's in good shape. You can see on that winding that's coming from the leading pole, that thing is really hanging out there. It's like a flag in the wind for me. That thing gets it loose, and with the centrifugal force and the RPMs that these things turn, again subject to it working, if that thing gets a little bit of slack, it'll hang out there and grab something. It's just my luck, it would anyway. Maybe we can work with that and get it a little bit better. Looking in pretty good shape here. Last little check over here, maybe take a look and see if we add a little bit more glue in some strategic places here. That way, once we get ready to flip over and do the solder, we don't see any problems. A lot of the racers in the good old days, they would take and actually put super glue on the windings themselves on the top. Because as it heats up and those windings get hot and then they flex, same issue with the outer wire that we're trying to push back over here, that as they flex, they run a risk of decoiling. And everything gets hot, it kind of seats into place, and you're never going to get a perfectly tight wind. So much so that you won't get some slack out of it once you actually use it a bit. Go around here, and then we'll get some flux on this, set our solder. Now the way I like to do it, I don't like to feed the solder into the soldered iron as I'm getting it hot. I like to pre-designate exactly how much solder I'm going to be using, and this way I don't over solder it and I don't create a big blob, because the heat naturally from the soldering iron is going to pull the solder towards it. Solder is drawn towards the heat. So what we do is I'll put a flux on that's going to give it our best chance of sticking and adhesion. It's going to clean the wire, it's going to clean the comm plate as it gets hot, and then that solder is going to heat up and it's going to bond. Fingers crossed, like it's supposed to. So I'll just go ahead and put the little dab of flux right onto the wires themselves, and it'll kind of bleed over and branch over a little bit onto that plate. Take the little pieces of solder and I just cut them about as wide as the width of the tab, and I just lay it parallel with the outside tab just to the inside, almost right on the comm plate itself, the tab comm plate. And I do that for each one, so when I get going we just bounce from one to the next. Again, about equal amount of solder. For each, as to not overdo it. I have a bad habit of feeding too much solder into my solder joints. Now I'll take the soldering iron. I already had it hot before I started cutting the solder. As you can see, heated on the outside near the windings at the very tip of the tab. And once that tab gets hot enough, it'll melt that solder and come rushing right on across there. Because the soldering iron is actually drawing the solder across those wires, through them, if you will. We don't want to get too crazy, especially the one where, remember, we replaced that tab, because there's a solder joint underneath the tab itself on the little bitty contact that runs across. So now that we've got those soldered up, we're going to cut this excess wire off. Should be just on the one tab. Get that out of our way. We don't want that slinging around and getting hung up on something. And yes, I know I shouldn't be fooling with these wires with my X-Acto knife. So let's switch to the tweezers. Not that that's much better, but I'm just trying to get this loose piece of wire out of here. So overall, I think we've got this thing back into one piece here. We're getting really close to where we can do some ohm testing on it, see what that looks like, make sure we're reading within 0.1 or don't have more than a 0.1 variance in the ohm readings across the various tabs and poles. And I'll do a little still shot there. You can kind of see the finished product of what she looks like. And we'll do another one here on the front side, see how she turned out. I'm pretty pleased with how things look. We'll do a little quick ohm reading here. As soon as we're done with that, do one final inspection, and then we're gonna jump. For you, it'll just be jumping right into it, but for me, I'll get it mounted to a plate where we can drop it into a chassis and we can give it a little sound test, what I'd call the bench test, and see how it does. Of course, subject to it ohming out. Looks like we got 4.5 right there, 4.6 across two poles, 4.5 across the third, and get that plate mounted on it. There's a still shot of it. And for the most part, this last section, I'm just gonna let the background noise play so you can hear everything when I put this car together. But if you liked all the videos and you really enjoyed the process of restoring this Super 2 Armature, and you'd like to see more, definitely be sure to like, subscribe to the channel, click on the little bell so you get the notifications when the new stuff pops out. I don't know how much longer I'll be posting on the social media pages, but I'll try to get some links on there, but I might not be as diligent. So it's very important if you want to keep up with everything I'm working on, and there's definitely some other projects in the pipeline that you do that. Now right here you can see I'm spinning this around to show you that it is the Armature repaired. You can see right there's a gray tab where we rebuilt it. There's a quick shot of the other side, what it looks like. Then we've got this on the original Super 2 Armature plate. So let's pop this baby in here and see what she'll do. Hope you enjoy the rest of the video. Thanks for watching.